Hi. Thank you for having me. It's an extreme honor to be here and to tell you all about First on Scene and a little bit about what I've been doing this past year. Um, like Leslie said, my name is Kirti Patel. Before we get started, I wanted to apologize for my voice and if I at some point have to mute myself and cough. Unfortunately, I've been sick for the past couple of days, but I'm feeling a lot better for our presentation tonight. I wasn't aware that we were doing an introduction, so most of what she said is on the slide. To reiterate, I'm a senior at UNC Chapel Hill, studying nutrition and economics. I'm going to be graduating in less than a month now, which is quite exciting. I've been an EMT for the past 3 years, and then kind of a little bit more related to what I'm going to be talking to you all about today is I started teaching CPR and first aid through UNC EMS the spring of 2022, so roughly 1 year ago. And then a little bit later in the presentation, we're going to be talking about First on Scene. It's a mobile application that I created and started working on June of last year as well. So I wanted to kind of start off right off the bat and kind of answer what exactly am I trying to do and what do I hope you can walk away from this presentation with. My main goal is that I'm trying to save lives and create a safer community through education, and I'm going to hopefully give you all some ideas on how you can do that yourself and help your communities as well. So what are we going to cover? So we're going to talk about the problem, which is cardiac arrest and just medical emergencies in general, the solution that I'm trying to take and we're trying to take, which is education, how we're currently doing that at UNC, how I want to and plan on building on that, and then what you specifically can do. Awesome. So part one is the problem. So there are over 350,000 cardiac arrests that occur every single year in the United States outside of the hospital. Unfortunately, only 10% of those actually survive to leave the hospital. Bystander CPR increases those chances of survival by 2 to 3 times, but unfortunately, only 40% of outside of the hospital cardiac arrests receive that bystander CPR. So if we're able to increase those numbers, we can drastically improve outcomes and save a lot of lives. When we talk about medical emergencies, people think about 911 and EMS, and they might have the question, if those services exist, why is it that I need to do anything besides kind of call 911 and get those resources there? Unfortunately, the median time from the time you call 911 until EMS actually arrives on scene is over 7 minutes. And every minute without CPR, the chances of survival decrease by 10%. So if you take that median time of 7 minutes, the chance of survival just when EMS arrives is going to be around 30%. And that is assuming that you called 911 the instant it happened and all other circumstances are in absolute perfect conditions. So having that early bystander CPR is absolutely critical if we want to improve cardiac arrest outcomes. Something which I'm realizing now that I might have glanced over is, do we all know what cardiac arrests are? Does somebody, trying to make this a little bit more interactive, does somebody want to give a shot in the dark what a cardiac arrest is, or does somebody know what a cardiac arrest is and give us a definition? Check the chat. When the heart stops, yes. So a lot of people might confuse cardiac arrest and heart attacks. A heart attack is when there's a blockage in one of the vessels supplying oxygen to the heart or oxygenated blood to the heart. That can lead to the muscle of the heart starting to slowly die, and eventually the heart will stop. So a heart attack can lead to cardiac arrest, but there are also other causes of cardiac arrest. That can be some sort of electrolyte imbalance, which causes the electricity of the heart that kind of makes it pump the way it does, something causing an irregularity in that, depriving the person of oxygen, a lot of different things. Yes. So bystander CPR is extremely important. And then a second factor is AED use. So does anybody know what an AED is? I'm gonna look in the chat again. Arterial defibrillation, almost. So an AED is an acronym. It stands for Automated External Defibrillator. Yes, awesome. So if anybody's ever watched a medical show where they see the people kind of take the 2 paddles, they rub them together, say clear and then shock the person. Essentially, it does the same function as that, except for it's designed slightly differently. So instead of having two paddles, we now have two sticky pads that you can put on someone's chest. And once you power on the device, it'll kind of talk you through everything, which is why it's called automated. It can recognize when you need to shock someone, and then it can recognize if it doesn't need to shock someone, which is why it's designed to be used by the general public, even if you have no medical training whatsoever. AEDs are extremely important because while CPR essentially takes over the role of the heart and continues to pump blood throughout the body, keeping the person alive, the AED is actually what can actually fix the underlying problem and kind of bring their heart back to functioning. If you were to wait until EMS arrived to use the AED, because that is something that they would use, the chance of survival of that patient is 13%. But if the AED was used by bystanders within a much shorter period of time, the chance of survival is upwards of over 50%, close to 60%, which is over a full 4-fold increase. So this obviously shows that both bystander CPR and AEDs are extremely important. And unfortunately, they aren't used very much. So the question is, how can we increase how often they're used? So the solution, education. Studies have found that when you educate the public on CPR, there's a 25% increase in the rate or in the frequency that bystanders are involved in CPR, which creates an even more drastic 37% increase in the survival rate of those patients. There's even a more drastic difference for AED use. So in the untrained population, AEDs are only used close to 2% of the time compared to 34% of the time for trained individuals. And this is kind of a few-fold. If you don't know about an AED, you won't even know to go searching for one, to go find one. Also, an AED is a much more scarier and much more complicated looking device if you've never heard about it or ever practiced with it, compared to a skill like CPR, which a lot of the times when you call 911, they'll actually talk you through. So now that we know the solution, how are we trying to implement that? Or what have we been doing to try to implement that? So we've been trying to offer free CPR and first aid trainings at UNC. The reason why free is really important is that if you wanted to go through a service like AHA, the American Heart Association, the Red Cross, and get a certification, unfortunately, it costs money. So I'm a AHA, like an American Heart Association instructor. At the sites where I work, or at some of the sites that I work, if you wanted to get your CPR certification, it would cost $50. The reason for that is the American Heart Association charges $20 for the card itself. And so that cost is passed from the institution that's offering it to the person receiving it. And then there's also overhead costs for that institution to offer those trainings. There are places that do volunteer classes, so you can still get your certification. Most of the time it's at cost of the card, so $20 rather than $50. But that's still a huge barrier for a lot of people. Which is why at UNC we wanted to start offering free trainings. You unfortunately wouldn't receive your certification from any sort of organization, but you would still learn the exact same skills that you would in any other training, because most of our instructors are AHA or Red Cross instructors, also teaching these trainings at UNC. So I started doing this through UNC EMS, the collegiate EMS organization. We respond to 911 calls on campus. And then we partnered with ACERIP, that is the organization on campus that teaches EMT classes. We are UNC EMS was just a much smaller organization, and in order to teach the number of classes we wanted to, we just needed a much larger resource of instructors. We received $1,500 from the McDonald Fellowship at UNC. We used that to purchase equipment, as well as ACERIP was able to donate a lot of equipment to us. And then we were able to start offering free CPR trainings to the community starting the fall of 2022. So earlier this academic year, we were able to start expanding. Each training had a max of 24 people. The trainings was split into two parts. The first was a 40-minute presentation, kind of teaching you the steps of CPR, teaching you the steps of first aid, and then 20 minutes where we would observe you practicing those skills to kind of help build that muscle memory and familiarity with what you would be doing on a real scene. So I created this flowchart of kind of the different components that it took in order to bring these classes to fruition. So UNC EMS, I designed the trainings the spring of 2022. We did some pilot runs with a few smaller student organizations. However, it wasn't until the fall of 2022 that we were able to really start expanding and offering a lot more trainings. The McDonald Fellowship provided equipment through their funding, and then ASRIP provided us majority of our instructors, as well as a lot of our equipment in terms of like mannequins that they were able to donate. To date, we have 38 instructors that have taught over 500 individuals CPR and first aid throughout 32 trainings since the fall of 2022, which is something that we're extremely proud of, and something that we hope to continue. We tried to structure the logistics of things so that it was a separate entity between not related to UNC EMS or ASRIP. That way it could kind of continue on its own and be self-sustaining without either organization's involvement. A little bit of self-promotion. There is something called the Heart Safe Campus. It is a designation given through the National Collegiate EMS Foundation. In order to receive that designation, you need to be able to prove that 5% of your campus population is trained in CPR. UNC has a student population of 32,000, which is absolutely insane in my opinion. And so 5% of which is roughly 1,600 people. Obviously the 500 that we trained was less than that 1,600, but we were able to contact the School of Medicine, nursing, pharmacy, dental, etc., and be able to get a roster of everybody that had ever was currently trained in CPR and able to prove that over 5% of our student population was. And then you also needed to have a publicly available database of AEDs on campus. That way, if there is ever a medical emergency, everyone or anyone is able to find where the nearest AED is to them. So I've talked about what the problem is. The solution is education. I've showed you how UNC has been trying to implement that education. But I think that there's more that we can still do, and there's more that I plan to do. And I kind of wanted to give a little bit more insight into what that is. So taking a step back, cardiac arrest, the goal that we're trying to achieve is improving outcomes. And so looking at each of the different steps and seeing how we can improve in each of the different areas. So the first and the most important aspect is early activation of the 911 system. Bystanders can do the two most important things, which is CPR and use an AED. However, medical professionals not only are trained in how to do those things, they do it more frequently, but they also do have some additional capabilities like medications. So it is important that you're able to activate that system because that is much more definitive care. Second is we just want to improve bystander CPR. Initially, or early in the presentation, I said it was roughly 40%. We would love to increase those numbers. I've talked a lot about how education is one of those solutions. The second of which is empowering the community to take action. So even if you had the entire community trained in CPR, whether that be a week ago, a month ago, a year ago, 10 years ago, most people that aren't medical professionals or in healthcare aren't thinking about the rate that you do CPR, the hand placement, the depth that you go at, all of these things that might make someone hesitant if they don't feel confident in their information or in their education. So finding a way to kind of refresh that information in the moment so that people feel confident in what they're doing. And then lastly, we've pointed out how AEDs are super important. So making sure that AEDs are easily accessible and that there's an accurate map in order to find where the AEDs are closest to you. So I wouldn't have put all of those things on that screen unless I had an idea of how to improve on some of those areas. And so my solution to those is First on Scene. It is a mobile application available on iOS and Android. There's a three feature approach. I'm going to talk about it in a little bit. It is available on the App Store. So if you wanted to take your mobile device, scan the QR code, you're more than welcome to. I'm going to kind of talk you through exactly what you can do with the app. I will say that the last thing that I'm going to be talking about is the AED manager. There have been a few hiccups, and so the latest version that's out right now might have a few crashes, but that should be fixed within the next couple of days once everything is fixed. Yes, awesome. So the first thing that I talked about is early 911 activation. So directly in the app, so if you look on the image to your left, there's a whole lot of different medical emergencies. Right now, we're really focused on cardiac arrest. Since we initially launched the app, we've actually removed all the emergencies except for cardiac arrest and bleeding control, and that was at the advice of legal counsel. That's just something that we're going to pursue in the future. Right now, we're really focused on cardiac arrest. And then if you look on the image on the right, you can see when you tap cardiac arrest at the very top, it has a function to call 911 if you were to tap that and then confirm that you would like to call. And then it gives you step-by-step instructions on what to do during cardiac arrest, the same information that we teach in our trainings. This is not meant to serve as an initial education. This is really meant to be a refresher for somebody that's already taken the training to kind of remember, where do you put your hands, how fast do you need to push, things like that, so that they feel more confident to take action. Second, we have an interactive map. So this uses the user's location to locate the nearest AEDs or other medical resources in the future. Currently, we're focused on AEDs closest to them. There are markers that you can see on the video to your right that provides the name of the building, the address of that building, and a description of where to find that medical resource. And this is the most effective in the situation that, or this would be a lot more effective in the situation where somebody that is foreign to a campus or foreign to an environment comes to that area. If you know an AED is located in, for example, a large building on UNC's campus, is the student stores. Even if you know it's there, unless you are familiar with that environment, you wouldn't be able to find it unless you would kind of track it using GPS. And now last, we have the AED manager. So to talk about the manager, the other two components of this is really meant for the situation where the cardiac arrest happens in front of you. You can take out your phone, open up the app, call 911, firstly. Second, look at the instructions on how to do CPR, ideally start CPR, and then tell somebody where the nearest AED is to you, and then have them go get it for you while you continue CPR. The AED manager, on the other hand, kind of serves the function of ensuring that that AED, whenever it's needed, is able to function properly, as well as you're able to maintain a good and accurate map of where the AEDs are. And I'll tell you why that's a problem in just a second. We're actually talk about that now, and come back to this. So I'm using UNC as an example because that's the campus that I'm the most familiar with and the place that I've done the most work with. So if you were to Google UNC AED, one of the first links that you'll find is a link to the website, which I've taken a screenshot on the right. This one does not use your GPS location, but it does have a map of UNC's campus. If you were to click on each of the icons, they would tell you what building that AED is located in, as well as a short description of where it's located. Those descriptions you can actually see in that same image in the bottom left. For example, at the top one says main entrance, medical drive, street level, floor 3. The problem is that, so when I contacted, or the entity that kind of puts this map out there is Environmental Health and Safety. When I contacted them with my app and said, would it be possible for me to use these locations and integrate them within my app? They said that would be fine. However, unfortunately, this information is not the most up to date. And the reason for that is that while EHS, Environmental Health and Safety, is kind of the highest level entity at UNC that is responsible for knowing where these AEDs are and publicizing this registry, they're not the ones that place, they're not the ones that remove or maintain the AEDs. That is the responsibility of each and every specific department. So what ends up happening, for example, is the biology department decides that they want an additional AED on the 5th floor of Coker Hall building, the biology department. They'll place the AED, but if they don't ever communicate that information to EHS, it unfortunately gets lost. The AED exists and it's there and it can be used, but no one knows or would be able to find it in the situation of a cardiac arrest. So when they told me that some of this information might be out of date, I started contacting each department's facility manager, and I was able to find a total of 157 AEDs on UNC's campus. So that obviously means a whole lot of AEDs are available and can be used and should be used in the right circumstances, but it wouldn't be accessible because nobody would know where to find them. So the solution to that, the unique solution that I tried to create with that was my AED manager. So it has the basic functionalities that most other AED managers on the market have. Even something as simple as an Excel could be used, but it has basic info. Oops. Let's try to play the video. It has basic information in terms of you can write the location of the AED, the address, description, the expiration of the pads and batteries, when it was last checked, and when its next check is, in order to give you a notification and a reminder. The unique and kind of innovative solution that I had to university specifically, because it is a decentralized system, is that you could have multiple collaborators on a single AED. I like to think about this like a Google Doc. You can have one person create the Google Doc, but you can have multiple people that have access to it and can view the contents of that Google Doc. So, for example, you can have the biology department's perspective on the right, the mathematics perspective on the left. So you would have one AED in Phillips Hall, 2 AEDs in the biology department buildings. And whenever they either perform a check, whenever they do anything, it will update on their screen, but it'll also update on EHS's screen. And so as you can see, the EHS, which is the perspective in the middle, has access to all 3 of those AEDs. So say, for example, biology department wanted to delete one of their AEDs. They could delete it on their end. It would also be removed from EHS's end. Or the same way they could add an AED, and EHS would also have that additional AED in their manager. Ideally, you're still communicating that information because there isn't any sort of notification that the AED has been added or removed. So you would have to consistently check. There is a red notification or the next check will become red once you pass that date. So for example, if somebody forgot to check the AED in genome sciences, EHS could open up their app, take a look at all the red ones, and then contact their fellow collaborators on that AED and remind them to go check on that AED to make sure it's being maintained properly and will function properly in the circumstance that it needed to be used. So I wanted to talk a little about other services that exist, because at the end of the day, my main goal is to improve cardiac arrest outcomes, and whether that means using my service or using someone else's, I truly care about the outcome and using the thing that is best for that circumstance, whether that be a different AED map or whether that be a different tool in terms of education. So there are other resources that exist for education regarding not only CPR, but other medical emergencies. The main one that I found, and probably the one I would advocate the most for, is the Red Cross's First Aid app. And then as far as a map that you're able to kind of locate where AEDs are located near you, PulsePoint has a great service, and it is used throughout the nation. They have over 160,000 AEDs mapped across the country. The main reason why I kind of thought of this mobile application was that I realized that PulsePoint has one minor flaw, which is that it doesn't cover universities. And the reason for that is that the way PulsePoint gathers its information is that it will go to the fire marshal of a county. That fire marshal, when they go and inspect businesses for fire extinguishers, they'll also ask the business owners do you have an AED on your premises? And if they do, they will add it to their registry, and then they can go to a service like PulsePoint and then have those mapped. Larger universities like UNC, Duke, State, and a whole lot of others aren't serviced by the rest of the county and kind of operate independently. They actually get serviced by environmental health and safety. So looking at the East Coast specifically, there are 79 universities that have a college campus EMS. And the reason why I limited it to campus EMS is that for my personal expansion, it would be the most beneficial to have a university where you can have people that already likely have kind of worked on providing CPR education, have tried to already map out their own AED locations. And so I kind of limited to those universities. Only 10 of them are mapped on services like PulsePoint. And those universities are all smaller universities that are well integrated into the larger city. So for example, like DC or New York, when you have college campuses like UNC, Duke, State, and the ones in North Carolina that are kind of part of the county, but kind of also independent and separate, you typically will not be serviced by the county overall, and you wouldn't be mapped on services like PulsePoint. And that's kind of where I fill that niche. And then no service really focuses on having both how to locate an AED as well as that information on how to do CPR. And while that isn't necessary, I do think that in that high adrenaline, anxiety driving state of a cardiac arrest, you want to keep things as simple as possible. And in the cardiac arrest little instructions that's within my app, there's actually the AED map is already linked in there, so you don't even need to tap around too much. Awesome. In the future, once I get that AED manager up and running, ran into a few bugs more recently. My biggest goal is to create a centralized AED registry for UNC. EHS has already said that they would be excited to work on that project with me and are interested in doing so. There is a race cars trial that is specific to North Carolina. It is run out of Duke, and their entire goal is kind of increasing a bystander CPR and AED utilization, a very similar mission to mine, and kind of working with them and hopefully partnering with them at some point. And then finally, expanding the AED map. So I've mapped out UNC's AEDs, and hopefully with those 157, once they get added to EHS's existing service, I'll then map them onto mine. But I'm also working right now with Duke's campus EMS to map Duke's AEDs on their campus. And then last but not least is what can you do? Before I kind of talk about that, are there any questions about either what I've done at UNC, what I'm trying to do with my app, any questions about CPR, anything like that?
You see, there is one in the chat. It goes back to your screen when you show the AED symbols. Yes.
Okay. Why are some of the AED symbols blue and white and some in black and white? Yes. So to answer that question, this screen recording that I have is slightly out of date. The blue was designated for AEDs that I had taken a photo of. So I had gone to that location and taken, let's see if I can find it. So the AEDs that are in blue would have the photo at the bottom. The ones that are in gray and black would just have a generic photo of an AED. That is something I've kind of pivoted directions on, rather than me personally going to each site, because that is impossible if I wanted to expand to other universities. I've kind of removed that, and I'm leaving it up to if EHS or the local campus EMS, if they want to provide those images, I'll add them. Otherwise, I'll kind of leave it blank, and then everything will be a uniform color. One of my goals is that since I am focusing mostly on universities, I'm trying to make UNC's markers UNC blue, Duke's markers Duke blue, State's markers State red, or just kind of matching the icon with the university's colors. That might be something I can continue with, something I might not be able to. Oh. I feel like that might be good. Yeah, and so that's something I want to avoid, is I don't want it to make it seem like the gray ones are out of service or out of order, because they are very much so functional. That was just something that I had done for myself to kind of delineate the ones that I still needed to go to and kind of take photos of. If you were to open up the app now, there might be some crashing issues with the map, but once that's fixed, they should all be red at this point in time, just because I wanted to create a uniform color for all of them, and universally AEDs are red. But I do think that the AED colors to the university is kind of quirky and something that I like, something that I'm hoping to go back to in the future. And then there's so I am graduating this year. I do not have a team working with me, and that is the reason that I've kind of been focused on universities that have campus EMS organizations. So I was I was highly involved with my local campus EMS, and I'm going to be continuing to work with the people that are kind of filling in the positions that I was in, regarding things like taking those photos and things like that. However, the most of the work that I do now is with environmental health and safety, or working with the university itself to kind of start promoting the app through the university and integrating it within its existing mobile applications and things like that. A lot of that, unfortunately, requires more legal maneuvering than actual medical or anything like that. Awesome. Any other questions? The kind of the most important part of this entire presentation, while I love being able to tell everyone what I've been able to do, hopefully people are able to use that and kind of maybe want to learn CPR and do things like that. The most important thing I want everyone to leave this presentation with is, what can you personally do? First and foremost, you can learn CPR. Hopefully I've kind of emphasized why exactly knowing CPR is important, why exactly bystander CPR prior to EMS arrival is important and can save lives. And then you can do this through services like AHA and the Red Cross. Again, those are certifications and they will cost money, unfortunately. Or if you wanted to just Google 3 C's of hands-only CPR, you'll find lots of tutorials, you'll find lots of videos and people trying to teach you the skills of CPR without actually providing a certification. Because at the end of the day, the certification doesn't mean much. It's truly whether or not you feel confident and you know the skills to perform CPR. After learning the skill, I would highly encourage you to either download my app, which is First on Scene, or the Red Cross's First Aid app, just because in the situation of a medical emergency, as somebody that works in healthcare, I can tell you that everyone would get flustered, especially people that don't see it on a regular basis. And so being able to take out your mobile device, open up the app, take a look at what those steps are, and just have a refresher of it is extremely beneficial. In EMS and in healthcare, we do the exact same thing, except for it's slightly different. We just have protocols. Those are step-by-step instructions on what to do in pretty much any medical situation, or guidelines. Next, I would advise you to find where the AEDs are in your campus and also just in your community around you. This is important because if you are in a medical emergency and you need to find an AED, rather than opening up an app, if you know that it's on the second floor of your building or it's on every floor of your building near the bathroom, that's going to be much quicker than even using an app or a service to find one near you. Obviously, you can't know where every single AED is all across the world. And so then I would encourage you to download an app, again, like mine, specifically for campuses, but also PulsePoint, because they have a much more extensive and robust database of AEDs all across the nation. And if you so happen to travel abroad, a lot of other services do exist abroad that do the exact same thing. PulsePoint is specific to the United States. And then finally, I would talk to someone to ensure that the AEDs are well maintained and accessible. Something that I found is that a lot of the AEDs and gyms are going to be within like drawers or in locked offices, which obviously is not beneficial in the situation of a cardiac arrest. And then finally is encourage the other people to take CPR trainings, and then you could even teach some CPR. For example, like in the 3 C's of hands-only CPR. Awesome. And are there any questions? That is all I have for this presentation. I did throw in a few numbers and percentages and studies, so I do have my resources, but I don't think anyone's going to be too interested in that. Excuse me. Okay. See if I can make my chat slightly bigger. I can go ahead and read the question, just because then people know what I'm trying to answer. Where other forms of education explored for increasing the use rate of AEDs or CPR, specifically on college or university campuses? I can imagine at a university that potentially getting faculty to talk about AED locations similar to fire exits might be useful, or offering CPR first aid as an elective course might be helpful, might help too. So that is kind of, let me answer the last 2 questions and let me see if I can kind of think of other things to answer your first question. So as far as getting faculty to talk about AEDs, so we have, when we first started teaching CPR courses, our first priority was faculty and staff. The reason for that was we have known that there's a lot of, there have been a lot of medical emergencies that have happened in large lecture halls. I know for a fact that 2 seizures happened during orgo lecture to the same professor. They were actually one of the first people to sign up for one of our courses, and they were telling us about that, how they didn't feel like they felt helpless, that they didn't know what to do, and that kind of taking these courses, even if there's nothing you can do, still gives you that confidence in order to kind of start the process and not freeze and call 911, kind of get people out of the area to kind of give someone's privacy and also protect them. So we did want to focus on faculty and staff. As far as them actually talking about where the AEDs are located in their like lectures, like at the start of school or anything like that, we didn't emphasize that too much. We did emphasize that anyone that took our courses, that the buildings that they regularly go to know where the AEDs are located there. Again, that's more applicable to faculty and staff because they are kind of central to either the biology department or the chemistry department, or if they're staff and they work in a specific building. Students, they kind of go everywhere on campus. And so it's kind of hard for them to realistically know where every AED would be, and which is where that having some sort of app really comes into play. And then offering CPR and first aid as an elective. I think the problem with that might be, and I haven't really considered it and looked into it too much, is that there's just not enough material to offer it as like even a 1 credit hour seminar or anything like that. It really is a 1-hour training. But because it is basic skills that we're trying to teach, on admitted students days, we have something called Fall Fest, when essentially all the freshmen and all the freshmen will kind of go to this one large field where we'll have like booths set up by every student organization, kind of promoting their organization, and we'll have a booth that's set up where people can learn in 30 seconds and practice within a minute CPR, like hands-only CPR. Sorry, I think my throat's reached the point where talking makes me want to cough more and more. So I might need to kind of take sips of water a little bit more frequently. So we do try to teach kind of really fast, really rapid CPR trainings to a whole lot of people. So for example, if you do it in like the middle of our campus, we can have a booth where people can just walk up. We'll give them a little prize, like sometimes we'll give them a little tiny first aid kit. People will do anything that takes a minute for free stuff. So they'll come there, we'll tell them how to do CPR, we'll watch them do CPR, they'll get the prize, and then they can go on with their day. And something like that, we can get maybe 50 to 100 people to kind of really quickly learn the skill of CPR. Maybe they realize that it's something easy that they find useful and are willing to take our actual course, which is kind of what we hope. And if not, at least they've had a little bit of experience and exposure to it. As far as having an actual course regarding CPR, so UNC in its sports exercise and sports science does have a first aid for athletes course where you do learn first aid, and their midterm is actually performing CPR, which I think is really interesting. And last semester or spring of 2022, last year, I taught a seminar which was kind of healthcare portrayed in media. And in that, the focus was learning CPR, first aid things. So it would have to be a course that kind of involves first aid and CPR. But those two in itself would not be enough to constitute a course. And then I think, yeah, that's pretty much it. Any other questions?